Hey guys, this is Speaker Freak 95, and today we're going to be assembling one of these kits you can buy at Radio Shack. These are pretty fun. I've built dozens of these things. In my area, they've marked these down $9.95 each, so I bought about 25 of them. Literally, I bought the whole entire stockpile of them. And I said, why not? Because I use these things in almost all of my projects that I do. 3 watts continuous power into a 4 ohm speaker. That's pretty good. And pretty simple. It uses the, I don't even know what chip this uses. A TDA 76 or 2667A chip. That's out of focus, isn't it? This is the one I assembled. I overdo things. I put heat shrink on the leads, and I used Panasonic capacitors. These are vintage capacitors. I check all these caps before I use them because they do tend to drift out of tolerance if they sit long enough. Sorry for the people coughing downstairs. It's just the way it is. My videos have all kinds of interruptions. So let's go ahead and assemble this. So a few things you'll need. Of course, you'll need the kit. You can buy these at Radio Shack or online. Good quality soldering iron. Just straight side cutters. Wire strippers, and possibly a screwdriver or two. Phillips flathead, either one. And I have a stockpile of vintage electrolytic capacitors. These are from, I think, 1989. And most of them are actually still within 20% tolerance, so they're still usable. But some of them are completely open or shorted, or I haven't found any shorted ones. But I have found a few of these out of tolerance. The reason why I'm going with these vintage Japanese electrolytics is they're a lot higher quality than the very crappy and infamously known these Jamicon brand capacitors. A lot of the Chinese manufacturers like Funai Electronics, they make just your cheap generic Walmart TVs and stuff, and they all use these Jamicon brand capacitors, and they're cheap and nasty. Now, I've not had any bad luck with these though. I've used them in some of my recap projects and stuff, but when I find them in TVs and VCR stereo systems and stuff like that that have been made in the last 10 years, almost all of them I had to replace, except for the very large ones, like these size ones. Were always good. They're but the smaller ones usually drift out of tolerance fairly quickly, and I just don't like the cheap capacitors, so I went with a bit higher quality capacitors, and got these from school actually. So let's go ahead and open this with one hand. And I did socket the IC, because I'm rough on things. I blow stuff up. It says specifically not to use an IC socket, but I do anyways. And you can pick these up at Radio Shack, of course, for 99 cents. I use the one and the other one. We'll go ahead and do that. Get a little bit of solder, some heat shrink tubing. This is the piece of foam that the IC chip comes on. Here's the circuit board. Pretty high quality, actually, very thick. And your components, we're not going to be using those electrolytics, we'll be using something else. And so let's get on to it. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get the IC socket. And I think the reason why they don't tell you, or they tell you specifically not to use one, because a lot of them don't have a polarization mark. Usually the IC has a little dot, but these ones do. Actually, if you look really closely, there's a little cutout in the top right here, and it's flat on the bottom. And what I do is I'll go ahead and there's a little notch here you have to follow. If you install it backwards, it might not work. I would say it would probably burst into flames or release the magic smoke, which needs to stay inside for it to work. Here's the IC chip, and you can see the little notch here. You want to make sure that you follow that notch, and you can install it directly onto the board, or you can do what I do, buy a cheap just Radio Shack IC socket, and make the unit somewhat replaceable. Because the capacitors and stuff on here normally won't go bad, especially if something goes fatally wrong, and it's easy to replace them. The IC chip is a pain in the butt to unsolder, so I just keep an IC socket on there. It makes things a lot easier in case something does happen. So now we got the board in view. We're going to be soldering it. Sorry if this video is not perfect, but I figured it's like more like an impulse video. I wasn't going to make it, but then I decided to, because these kits are readily available everywhere. Might as well make one of me building one. So I need to wet the tip of the soldering iron here. Sorry if I'm in the way here. I'm not a pro at making videos, and that's painfully obvious in all my videos. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this. Don't want to cause any solder bridges. I do the outside pins first, just to make sure the IC doesn't move, or the IC holder in this case, make sure it doesn't move. And if it's sideways, it'll be all right. But it's best that you make sure it's nice and straight. Make sure it's nice and it looks good. So that's basically just how I'm going to solder it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that up. As you can see, I've finished soldering here. There's no solder bridges on either side. It's okay if you get a solder bridge on this side because that's all connected together anyways. And some people like to just solder the whole entire thing as one big solder bubble. I don't do that. These you definitely have to be separated. And nice, neat soldering is a must. And now we can go ahead and insert the IC chip here. And for some reason, these chips come with the legs spread farther apart than they should be. So we'll just go ahead and insert that here. Sometimes you have to bend the legs inward a little bit with your thumb, if you observe there, to get it to sit down correctly. And press it in nice and firmly. And I've always had trouble getting these in, even in the circuit board. There we go, we got the chip in there. It's nice and sideways, but I'll fix that in a moment. Well, I'll just fix it now. That's probably why they said don't use an IC socket, is because they're hard to use. But it makes it easily replaceable. And as you can see, we followed the notch. If you see really closely where the ST mark is on that IC, you can see there's a little cutout. That is the notch that you follow. Here's the electrolytic. The first one we'll be installing. This is quite a bit larger than the stocked capacitors that come with the kit because they are older, but these sound a far bit better than the cheap generic ones that this kit includes. And I checked it, it's good. We're going to install it. We're going to put a little bit of heat shrink on there and move it up from the board because it is bigger. And I'll show you why that I used heat shrink and moved it off the board a little bit. Got a little bit of heat shrink tubing on there. We're going to shrink it a little bit more. And this will be almost like a standoff from the board. The reason being is because this capacitor is rather large. And it gets in the way of the IC for replacement. You want it to be out of the way where you can bend it over a little bit or scoot it when you replace the IC, if it ever needs to be replaced, which is not very often. But it happens. People like me blow stuff up, and that's the reason why we have an IC socket. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hand-eye coordination is out the window today. Sorry about that. And we want to follow the polarity. And don't do what I do. Let the heat shrink tubing run away from you. So go ahead and just flip that over real quick. Let me zoom out a little bit. Go ahead and just put that back on there. Sorry about that. And here's the board. Longer lead is positive. That goes towards the positive mark. The reason why that's standoff is because you see how big the capacitor is? Of course, if you use the ones that come with the kit, you don't have to worry about that. But I did it that way anyways, because I like the sound of these capacitors a lot more anyways. And plus, I'm a fan of vintage stuff, and these have never been used, and they're still good for the most part. You might have to adjust it so it's nice and straight, these heat shrink tubing. And I'm going to go ahead and insert that capacitor there. And then we'll bend the leads so that it'll stay. We'll go ahead and solder that in. Got the leads tinned, and this is where the cutters come in useful. Cut off the extra lead here. nice and close to the solder, and it gives a nice appearance, and it's nice and neat. As you can see, the capacitor's on there, nice and big and bulky and funny looking, but it'll sound a hell of a lot better than them cheap caps will, and it'll last even longer, I'm sure. I'm sure these will outlast these cheap generic units here, these Jamicons. I don't like them. I just don't like them at all. But that's it. Here's the diode. We're going to be installing that a little bit off the board like I did the other capacitor. And that silver ring that you see on one side is follows where it says D1 right here. You want to match that. That's for polarity protection. If you hook this up backwards, it won't work. And this is what we're looking for. Nice. Sorry for the hand-eye coordination issue here, but and then we'll go ahead and tin the leads on there. Got the diode installed. Next we'll be installing the next two capacitors. That's a I don't know what the values are, but yeah, we'll install those next. So the next two capacitors are a 47 microfarad and a 100 microfarad capacitor. A lot of these Velleman kits use a lot of 100s, I've noticed, and let's just take a look at this 100 compared to this one. Obvious size difference. This is 10 volts, rated 10 volts higher. You get to see the difference in quality there. It's a lot bigger, but this will work a lot better than the cheap generic one will. And there's mixed opinions about using older capacitors versus the newer ones. Not all new caps are bad. It's just the off-brand new caps that I absolutely despise with a passion. I went ahead and installed these two blue capacitors. I don't know what the actual name of them is, but I tilted them to the side because these capacitors, the next two, the 47 and the 100 microfarad capacitor, are a little bit larger than the ones specified that for use. They designed the boards for those particular parts. I'm using different parts, so I have to modify it slightly. Tilted the caps to the side, trimmed the leads, and now we're going to go ahead and insert the 100. Longer lead is positive on these. Don't know if it's the same for all. You'll see exactly why right there. Why I have the that one. I think it's a tantalum capacitor to the side. It's starting to look more like an amplifier now. Got 2 out of the 3 capacitors installed. We're going to go ahead and install the last electrolytic, which is a 47. Sorry about my hand being in the way there. There's not much I can do about that. And as you can see, it's not going to work out too well. It's going to be sideways. That's not what I want. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take it, and I'm going to have to bend that lead and make like a little L shape with that, like you just saw right there. Do the same thing with the other one. And that'll be able to let us shift the capacitor over, so that it's not in the way of the large 470. And that's pretty much what we want right there. So we can go ahead and solder that in. Now I installed the last 2 electrolytics on there. Before that I installed those 2 smaller ones. And now it's time for me to go take the heat shrink and shrink it with the heat gun. Be careful not to singe the plastic off these capacitors. It's quite easy to do, even with the newer ones. And after you do that, you end up with this after you put leads on it. I don't use those little pegs because they're hard to hold when you solder. Not only that, you can't really solder much to them. You have to wire wrap it and then solder, or you can just tack solder it. And pretty much that's what it's going to look like. Let's go hook it up to a power supply and a good speaker. Hook it up to my phone. Just have the audio cable like that. I do not suggest monoing the signal together, just putting the left and right together like that. Could create a monoing box like over here. Like it's right here. This is just like, say, a set of RCA inputs. Here's the wall of the panel, and it goes through two 470 ohm resistors. Then after it exits the resistors, it monos together to your positive, to your amplifier, and between the positive and negative got 20K, and that prevents damage in some situations. Here's the power supply we're going to be using, and here's the PDA speaker, or just horn speaker, insanely efficient speaker here. We're using that for the test speaker. So here we've got it hooked up, just feeding it 12 volts. It can take a maximum of 15. Got the phone here, and we got speaker hooked up. That's just a two-way outdoor horn speaker. Seems to be working. Seems to be working great. These are vintage capacitors. I check all these caps before I use them because they do tend to drift out of tolerance if they sit long enough. Sorry for the people coughing downstairs. It's just the way it is. My videos have all kinds of interruptions. So let's go ahead and assemble this. So a few things you'll need. Of course, you'll need the kit. You can buy these at Radio Shack or online. Good quality soldering iron. Just straight side cutters, wire strippers, and possibly a screwdriver or two. Phillips flathead, either one. And I have a stockpile of vintage electrolytic capacitors. These are from, I think, 1989. And most of them are actually still within 20% tolerance, so they're still usable. But some of them are completely open. Hey guys, this is Speaker Freak 95, and today we're going to be assembling one of these kits you can buy at Radio Shack. These are pretty fun. I've built dozens of these things. In my area, they've marked these down $9.95 each, so I bought about 25 of them. Literally, I bought the whole entire stockpile of them. And I said, why not? Because I use these things in almost all of my projects that I do. 3 watts continuous power into a 4 ohm speaker. That's pretty good. And pretty simple. It uses the, I don't even know what chip this uses. A TDA 76 or 2667A chip. That's out of focus, isn't it? This is the one I assembled. I overdo things. I put heat shrink on the leads, and I used Panasonic capacitors. They're shorted, or one other. I haven't found any shorted ones, but I have found a few of these out of tolerance. The reason why I'm going with these vintage Japanese electrolytics is they're a lot higher quality than the very crappy and infamously known these Jamicon brand capacitors. A lot of the Chinese manufacturers like Funai Electronics, they make just your cheap generic